Okay, my table is so messy and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, okay? Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jules and I am a person who absolutely does not have a problem with buying too many art supplies. I can stop whenever I like. I really can. That's my promise to you, and yeah, I'm fine, okay? But today I received a little tiny baby art haul in which I received a new sketchbook from Stillman & Bird, which means, you know what it means. It means that I've got to start a new sketchbook, which is everybody's scariest part of the year, and also gives me an excuse to go through my old sketchbook with you guys. And in amongst it was one pan of watercolour paper. One sketchbook, one pan of watercolour. How restricted is that? And it was this one, which doesn't look like much on the surface. It is Shadow Violet Light by Roman Szmal. And I got this because Roman Szmal has a confusion of beautiful, granulating, separating watercolours. And I was confused about what the actual difference is between some of them, whether you can need them all, whether you justify buying them all. Spoiler alert, I think that I'm happy that I have them all. And I wanted to share the differences with you, so maybe you can choose your favourites and not have to buy them all, like I did, to find out which ones you like the best. Now, in recent years, there's been a bit of an explosion, if you like, of people really getting excited about these granulating, separating watercolours. I think this also started with the Daniel Smith Primatech colours, which were always very highly textured and interesting to look at. And then the Schminke super granulating lines came out, and those really took off on the internet. Everyone was really excited about those. I have some myself. But today I thought I would highlight 7 of these multi-pigment separating watercolours that I own by Roman Szmal, because I think they're all really beautiful and I'm excited to look at them all together. So I've set up a sheet of watercolour paper here for us to swatch on, and I'm excited because we've got these nice long strips to swatch in basically, and I plan to have one end be more concentrated and one end be more diluted, and then because these granulating colours really show their best when you give them a lot of water and a lot of room to separate on the paper. So the 7 colours I'm going to be covering today are Misty Morning, Shadow Violet Light, and Shadow Violet, regular Shadow Violet. I was going to say Shadow Violet Deep, but it's not. And these were the 3 colours which I was initially most interested in finding out what the difference was between them. And then on this bottom row, I have Ocean Blue, which is the colour that's unique to a Roman Szmal, Autumn Green, Aquarius Green, and Mineral Violet. Now you notice that these are all very cool colours, very blue-green colours, and you'll quite often find this when you look for granulating colours. You don't tend to see so many reds and yellows, and that's because the most granulating pigments in watercolour are cobalt colours or ultramarine. And these colours are blues and greens. So when you want to look for the most interesting granulating mixes, you're often going to have a blue or a green in there to get the most out of it. That's not to say that there's no granulating red or yellow watercolours. Potter's Pink is a granulating red pigment, but it's definitely more on the light side. But yeah, just in case you were wondering why you don't see so many of those, that's why. I do have a little bit of a chat about granulating yellows in a previous video I made where I painted some lemons. I quite like that video. Didn't get that much attention, but I did have a quick chat about granulating yellows in that video if you want to check it out. So first we're going to swatch out the colours, and then I want to have a play around to discuss with you some of the ways that I've found to really maximise what usage that you can get out of owning a multi-pigment granulating mixture. So I want to start out with Misty Morning, and Misty Morning is a very special colour to me because it is the first colour that got me back into watercolours after goodness knows how many decades. It was the first Roman Szmal colour I bought for Christmas a couple of years ago, and it was the only watercolour I owned at the time. And you can see in the pan, it looks like a sort of cloudy blue, which is what you might expect, I suppose. And it's constituent pigments, there's only 2 of them, and it's PG50, which is cobalt teal, and PV19, which can be a quinacridone, pink, rose, or violet, depending on which version you choose. And so you can see when you go first down with this paint on the paper, it looks just like quite a nice muted, very sort of cloudy sky looking blue. It really is aptly named, I think. But then when you add a little bit more water, you start to see, especially as it dries, some really, really interesting separation of this sort of vivid green and pink colours, which you would just have never expected in a million years would mix to make this soft, cloudy blue colour that we see in the mass tone. This paper is just cellulose paper, so it won't necessarily have the smoothest gradient to it, but it should show the separation quite nicely. And you can see it doing it already in the washed section out. In the washed out section, rather. I haven't spoken much today, my words are coming a little bit clumsily. We'll, of course, give you a close-up version of all of these pigments, these paints, when they're fully dried. But up next is Shadow Violet Light. So this is made up of PB36, which I believe can be multiple colours, but I believe it's the cobalt turquoise, based on the separation that we see. PB29, which is ultramarine blue, and PR176, which is what Roman Szmal, the pigment that Roman Szmal uses for their permanent alizarin crimson. And I thought that on swatches I'd seen previously and also on the website, these colours looked very, very similar, which is why it took me so long to buy the Shadow Violet Light, because I thought, do I really need this? Like, even I was thinking, do I really need this? Because it just looked so similar. But having now being the proud owner of all three of these colours, I can say that they are sufficiently different from each other that if you enjoy collecting watercolours and you feel like all three of these bring you joy, then you can totally justify it. However, you could also just pick one and you wouldn't be missing that much. But as you can see, it is darker than the Misty Morning, and I think that's just because the pigments that they use, the PB36 and the PB29, are darker blue colours, green colours than the PG50, which is this very, hang on, I have it right here, is this very bright turquoise colour. I also have in my main palette. And then so when you use much darker ultramarine, you get a lot darker in the mass tone than you do with the Misty Morning, which I think makes a reasonable distinction between the two. And then finally, for this trio, we have Shadow Violet, which looks, well, it looks almost black on camera, but it looks very green in the pan. And to be honest, when you put it down on paper, initially, it looks very green. But it is an incredibly moody and interesting colour. It almost feels like it has a weird iridescence to it with the way that it separates. Because, I don't know. It's really hard to explain. And the pigments in this are PG50, so cobalt turquoise or cobalt green, maybe even. I don't know which version they use in this colour. Sorry if you can hear that fly. We've got that end of summer fly season going on, really annoying the heck out of me, but show must go on. But yes, it's got PG50, so cobalt teal or cobalt green. PB29, so the ultramarine blue, like the Shadow Violet Light, and then PV19, like the Misty Morning. So completely different set of pigments in the same vein, but just a different arrangement, if you like. And this is sort of distinct from Daniel Smith's Shadow Violet, which uses PG18, I believe, or is it Moonglow? I think this is supposed to be a little bit like, people compare it to Daniel Smith's Moonglow, but I think that one has Viridian PG18 instead. But as you can see, these three are quite different from each other. They're all in the same vein of being moody, separating purples, but in the end, I think that they all have very different applications, and you would find a use for all of them in a lovely, they're just so lovely to paint with as well. The quality of the paints is just, it's just amazing for the price. So we'll let these dry and move over to the other four paints I wanted to show you today. Okay, so up next we have the unique colour Ocean Blue, which also looks very green in the pan, and it's a mixture of Phthalo Blue Green Shade, PB15:3, and Naples Yellow Deep, PBR24, which is also a chrome titanate yellow. And I have a feeling that the separation in this one is, first of all, it's an absolutely stunning, vibrant turquoise colour. Really, really amazing to look at. But the separation is a little bit more subtle in this one, so I'll make sure that I add plenty of water and paint so we can allow the pigments to do their thing. Just making sure that we get the full range. The phthalo blue is obviously very strong, so when you add a lot of this paint on the paper, you end up with mostly phthalo blue, so you have to add quite a high concentration to see the yellow coming through, but it is there, and I have seen wonderful representations of it before. I hope the tape isn't too distracting. I was hoping to get like a nice clean edges on these swatches so that we'd see at the end what they really look like with a little bit of room to breathe. And it's I just found my white tape, so yeah, hopefully that's all right. And then up next we have my favorite green right now, which is this autumn green. They only released this color last year, I think, and it's a really stunning green. Like they couldn't have named it any more aptly. Like, and it's a mixture of PG26, which is cobalt green deep, PY150, which is nickel azo yellow, and PR122, which is a quinacridone pink, or yeah, a quinacridone magenta kind of color. And it is just stunning. No other words for it, really. I absolutely love this color, and I've been so surprised with how well it mixes. Quite often these multi-pigment paints, you expect that they don't mix so well because of the when you have multiple pigments in one paint, it often makes for unpredictable and slightly muddy mixes because you have a lot of colors all together in there. But I've been pleasantly surprised with this one. And as you can see, it's already doing its thing. It really glows off the paper with that nickel azo yellow in there, the PY150. And it's just truly makes me excited for autumn, which is saying something because while I love autumn, I also I'm not the biggest fan of winter, so it tends to fill me with a little bit of dread. Don't know if anybody else has complicated feelings about autumn like that too. You'll have to let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if you own any of these paints, and if so, like what you've used them for, what you really love about them, if you're really not on the hype train about the granulating paints at all and you prefer nice, flat, transparent colours, because I can totally see both sides of that opinion. Up next is this Aquarius green. So this is very similar to the Daniel Smith Undersea green that came before it. This is the Roman Szmal version, and it contains PY150, so the nickel azo yellow again, PB29, which is that ultramarine blue, and PBR25, which is a transparent brown, a benzimidazolone brown. So it's an earth tone, but it's quite a luminous earth tone, the PBR25, one of my favourite browns, as someone who's not quite so much of a fan of browns, and though I am working my way through it, as you can see in my last video when I was mixing all my colours with browns to see if I could make muted mixes that I would enjoy using. But this is a much more muted foresty green compared to the autumn green. It's absolutely beautiful, as is the other one, but just a lot darker on the more muted side, much less yellow. But nonetheless, we'll see what it looks like when it dries, because I think it's absolutely beautiful. This ocean blue is definitely separating, though it's definitely not so clear on camera, so maybe I'll have to take some pictures afterwards to show you the true beauty of that one. Also, this paper is buckling a tiny little bit, but hopefully it will flatten out when it dries. I'm really pushing it to the limit with the amount of water I'm using. And then the final colour we have for today is mineral violet. So this is quite a common combination of pigments, PB29, ultramarine blue, and PV19, potentially a quinacridone rose or a quinacridone violet. So when you put it on the paper, it goes down as sort of a true royal purple, almost exactly the same tone as a dioxazine purple, which is a lovely primary purple. Well, obviously not a primary colour, but like a nice mid-purple, say, so you could lean it more red or more blue, depending on your preference. And yeah, as this colour dries, it does separate. So you can see especially the blue granulation and then the transparent red violet pigment coming out with the quinacridone in the background, which makes for really, really stunning. This reminds me of irises or pansies, and I think if you did a lot of botanical painting, this would be a really, really lovely colour to have in your arsenal. But again, we'll have to see when it dries, because it really does just look like a nice mid-purple when it goes on wet. So as you can see, chaos continues to reign on my desk. I've got paints everywhere, so I should probably have a little bit of a tidy up, and then we can come back and look at these swatches together when they are fully dried. Okay, so we're back. I have labelled all these swatches with the name of the paint and also the pigment numbers, so you can have those for reference. And as you can see, all of these dry with some really, really supreme granulation. So in the mineral violet, you really see the ultramarine blue in the creases of the paper settled into the texture there, and then this pink colour that has been washed out because it's transparent. With the contrast between the Aquarius green and the autumn green, you can clearly see that the autumn green has way more of this yellow orange tone from the Nicolazo yellow and also the red pigment in there, whereas the Aquarius green is a lot more muted and has a lot more of this blue granulation from the ultramarine rather than from the cobalt green that's in the autumn green. It makes quite a, I think these two together make such like a nice pair. Like a much more vibrant one and a much more muted tone. In the ocean blue, so with the phthalo blue and the chrome titanate yellow, you can see, if you look really closely, the granulation that's settled in the paper there, this yellow granulation, which is really, really interesting. It makes for such an interesting separating paint that's really subtle. It really does look like the ocean, and like you can see the bottom of the ocean, the sand through the water. And then finally, these three to compare with the Misty Morning, the Shadow Violet Light, and the Shadow Violet. Three quite similar mixes, but you can see why I think that the PG50 and the Shadow Violet might be the actual cobalt green rather than cobalt teal, because it's just settled into the paper. It's a lot darker, a lot greener than the granulation in the Misty Morning, which is absolutely stunning. Look at this bloom down here where you can really see the pink and the bright green. It's such a stark contrast to the muted blue that it is when you paint it straight out of the pan. The fact that you can see these bright, bright colours. It really does look like a winter sunrise. I just absolutely love it. And then the Shadow Violet Light, I was saying earlier, my new paint for today, I was saying I was concerned it was going to be too similar to the Misty Morning. I would say you could probably choose one if you're not such a paint fanatic like me, but in the end they are different because the Shadow Violet Light is darker than the Misty Morning, but it has the same pink separation at the end. So I think this is like just such an absolutely stunning collection of colours. I hope you've enjoyed seeing all of them and what their magic is when you let them dry naturally on paper. With granulating colours, if you want to see the maximum granulation, you do need to be patient and let them dry naturally. They will not dry the same if you use some kind of heat tool like a hairdryer or a heat gun to dry them. They will dry less separating on the paper. So that's a pro tip for you for today. But I'm not quite done. There's one more experiment I want to do to show you how maybe if you have these colours and maybe a supplementary collection, much like myself, then maybe you can take these colours even further and get even more out of them. So you might be thinking, Jules, why do you have like colour wheels drawn on this piece of paper when you just said that often with multi-pigment colours you don't get very good mixes? Well, with these particular multi-pigment colours, I think that there's something different that you can do. And I'm not under the impression that this is a novel idea. I've seen other people do this, but I do think it's worth sharing still, because if you haven't come across this, then this is a really, really fun way to play with your granulating watercolours. So here I have the Aquarius green and the Shadow Violet Light. And in the case of these paints, I have all three of the pigments that go into both of these paints. So I have all of the individual components. And one way that you can really play around with these colours is to just add more of one of the constituents of the paint to it, to mix with it and create sort of a different tone of the same colour. So maybe it's easiest if I just explain by showing you. So I'm going to take some of this Aquarius green and put it in the middle here of this circle, so we can see what the normal colour is like. So of course you could always just buy the pigments separately and mix your own, but one thing I have found is that it is hard to get exactly the same tone. I've tried. I had some experiments earlier trying to mix the shadow violet light. So as you can see, this was my testing, and I never quite made it to this is the shadow violet light in the middle. I never quite made it there with my own mixing experiments. So certainly for convenience, I still think it's worth owning these pre-mixed versions of the colour. But the other things that you can do is to take a little bit of the pre-mixed colour and just lean it one way or another. So I'm going to take some of this nickel azo yellow from my ultimate palette. I have a video on this palette if you want to go check it out. I say this every video, but just in case somebody's new. Also, if you've made it this far in the video and you really love colours and you've enjoyed seeing what I've been sharing today, then maybe you consider subscribing and giving the video a like. It really helps my videos reach more people, and I'm so close now to my goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers, and I have to do something special for that. So yeah, please do consider doing that. It really helps me out. But as you can see, I mixed some of the nickel azo yellow into this Aquarius green, and it looks like almost a completely different colour. It's really like a vivid olive on my palette right now. So let's just see what it looks like on paper. So I'm just going to put it in this, it's not a quadrant. What do you call it when it's a, what do you call it when it's a third? A trident? That doesn't sound right. Oh no, I'm making myself laugh. It's not very cool. But as you can see, this is like it is taking it towards almost being more similar to that autumn green that we swatched before. But still exactly the same pigment as was used in the original. This is not going to be the neatest swatching, but honestly I think that helps show some of the qualities of the pigments in the paint a little bit better, especially because they really show their true characteristics best when you provide them with the ability to have a little chaos. Isn't that true of so many of us? So up next, I'm just going to do the same thing again. Take some of this Aquarius green, put it on my palette, be reminded of what it looks like, and then I'm going to add some of its another one of its constituent colours. So in this case, I'm going to use the brown, the benzimidazzolone brown, which is also in my palette in Roman Szmal's range. It's called transparent brown, and it looks it's a really reddish brown. And as you can see, when I add it to the Aquarius brown, I mean, maybe I added a little too much even. Sometimes it takes a couple of goes back and forth to get the right balance of the mix, as anyone who's tried will be able to verify. But you can see we get this a lot more muted brown, like a mossy brown. This would be lovely for like painting trees in a forest, like mossy fallen logs. And just by adding a little bit more of that transparent brown, we've taken this mixture in a whole other direction, but without like creating a muddy color. You don't create more neutral versions of the color by adding more of its constituent pigments, which is, I mean, mud is a term I try to avoid, to be honest, because I think that there's beauty in those muted tones as well. But as you can see, this is really much more of a brown version. You could almost, of course, yeah, just a completely different color, but using exactly the same pigments as was already in there. And again, we'll have to see how these all dry. So we're going to do the final version, so the final pigment that's in this Aquarius green. And the final pigment that's in the Aquarius green is ultramarine blue, and I have French ultramarine on my palette, and it's my favourite French ultramarine is the Roman Szmal version. And I think it will be really interesting to see if we can get like a blue-green like more of a foresty green. Contaminating my blue because I can't bother to wash my brush. Just lazy artist problems, am I right? But yeah, look at this. That is so interesting. Okay. Let's see how it goes. And it almost feels like you're mixing 3 primaries with this colour because the transparent brown, the PBR25, is so close to a red that it almost feels like you're mixing a red, yellow and a blue. It's just a little bit leaning towards the green side because there's less of the brown, and the brown isn't quite so much of a vibrant red. But you can see, I love when you can see the paint separating on the ceramic palette as well. It really is such a fun part of the experience of mixing watercolours to me. That's why I always make sure I share my palette view as well when I can. I'm going to add a little bit of water to this one so we can see the pigments separating. Might do the same with the version where we added more of the brown as well, just because I feel like we'll see more interesting separation that way. But this is my first time experimenting with doing this, but I think that it will really help me get the most out of these colours. And maybe you could just do a painting just using one of these convenience mixes, but plus its constituent pigments, so that you can really get like a wider range of colours out of this, and they would all be so harmonious in the painting. So I'm going to flip the palette around to give me some more space. And we'll move on to the next colour, which is the Shadow Violet Light. So I'm just going to take some of this and put my brand new paint. It's nothing like getting a brand new paint, really. I wanted to get like a whole bunch of new paints, but I held off for financial reasons. But I treated myself to this one because I wanted to do this comparison, and then doing that comparison sparked this video for you guys. So, you know, I guess in the end, it was a good purchase. Maybe one day I'll get a few pennies from my YouTube channel. I can spend them on paints. But yeah, I'm just going to dive straight in because it's exactly the same concept. So taking some of this Shadow Violet Light and mixing it with one of its constituent colours. So I'm pretty sure that based on the swatch that I just did, as you can see here, sometimes it can be hard to tell with cobalt pigment numbers, but I'm pretty sure that this is a cobalt turquoise, like the Roman Szmal cobalt turquoise. Hard to focus on it with the camera, there you go. It's not a cobalt blue, I think it's on the green side. So I'm going to use the Roman Szmal cobalt turquoise, which is PB36, and we'll see what colour we get. Sometimes this colour can be a little bit less easy to re-wet, but there we go. So it's very subtle with the cobalt turquoise, because I think it's already very heavy on the cobalt turquoise, this mixture. But we'll just give it a little shunt in the green direction, see what colour it gives us. Someone's hammering outside, I hope you guys can't hear that. I'm cutting it fine with my video today. I have to leave for bouldering in like 15 minutes. Might be a little late, but that's par for the course for me and my brain, so hopefully my friends won't mind too much. I hope everyone's had a good summer. It's been a little bit chaotic for me. I've been quite sick in the last month or so, so in a way I feel like I'm ready to move on, have a different season of my life and also this year. But I think it'll be really interesting to see how this colour dries. As you can see already, it's a lot more turquoise leaning than the original version, which is got a lot more purple tones coming out in it on the paper. So the next pigment to add to this Shadow Violet Light is once again the Ultramarine Blue, which I think really makes or breaks one of these granulating colours. You can really tell like when a colour has more or less ultramarine, and I found that when I was experimenting with trying to mix my own versions, the amount of ultramarine you added was really quite key. So I'm going to just be very tentative with my ultramarine edition. It's quite a strong colour. And you can see this takes it into being a much more sort of muted cornflower blue almost, which I love. And we'll see exactly how this contributes to how it dries on the paper. I'm looking at the colours drying from the Aquarius green colour wheel above, and I'm very excited about those results. So I have a hunch that these ones will be just as fun. And the interesting thing is that a lot of these colours were some of my favourites to begin with, like the PR176 that we're about to add to this shadow violet light in the next mixture. It has always been one of my favourite cool reds because I'm not really much of a pink person. Sometimes I struggle with magenta, though it is on my list. So I've always quite liked this. So when they use this in this kind of beautiful mixtures, I feel quite validated. But this is a lovely, lovely blue. Really lovely soft blue. And then finally, we're going to do the final mixture. I think this one is still on the camera. Yep. And mix this shadow violet light with some of its red component, which is the permanent alizarin crimson. It's also on my ultimate palette for a good reason. Ooh, okay. And that is a really, really nice warm purple. I think this is going to be very interesting because the ultramarine and the cobalt turquoise are both granulating colours, whereas the permanent alizarin crimson is transparent. So I think it will separate most out of all of the pigments that we've combined in this mixture. Just like how the ultramarine blue is the only granulating pigment in the Aquarius green. So I think that tends to be what contributes most to the granulation. And you can see them separating on the palette. It's just like magic. Just magic. So I think this is actually one of the best ways to use these granulating paints. Just to tilt them one way or another and get this whole range of colours that you can use. Not in a monochromatic way because they have multiple colours in them, but yeah, without muddying up your mixes, and they just form such an interesting palette all by themselves. So these are our mixtures from our experimenting with the constituent pigments of these colours. I think it looks really beautiful on the palette and also on the paper. They're still wet for now, so like before, I'm going to leave them to dry and then I'll come back to give you a close-up of the results and we can have a look together then. I hope you found this as exciting as I have. This has been a really pleasant afternoon. Okay, so full disclosure, these paints are not quite fully dry yet, but I am out of time, and as you can see, these are some really stunning mixtures. I really love that this Aquarius green tends to look very homogeneous when it's straight out of the pan. They did a really good job formulating this colour, but when you add literally any of the other colours, maybe I could have added more water to the version where I added more yellow, because I think that we could have seen more granulation there, but especially with the brown and with the blue, you get such interesting shades of this like foresty brown green tone. And with the shadow violet light, I think that when you add more of the cobalt turquoise, it turns into almost more of a Misty Morning-esque kind of colour. Whereas when you add the blue and the red, it just turns this most gorgeous granulating cornflower blue, just a really, really nice soft blue tone with the blue. And this really nice sort of magenta with blue granulation, like the way it settles into the paper. I just find that so interesting, and I think this would be really, really nice. I have a friend who recently did a really interesting landscape, just using like a foresty landscape, just using the shadow violet from Roman Szmal, and I think that this would work. That would also work with just about any of these granulating colours where you have this beautiful, beautiful separation. So to summarise, today we had a look at all of these really beautiful granulating colours from Roman Szmal, and here's another reminder in case you needed to see them again and take a note of the pigments, take a screenshot for your own reference if you like. And then we also experimented with shifting the mixtures to one direction or another on the colour wheel by adding some of the constituent pigments back into the paint. So I hope this has been a helpful video. Please do leave a like and a comment what you think about these colours, if you have similar experiences. And thank you so much for coming along on this adventure today. And with that, I will see you next week for another video. I'm really excited to share that one with you, so stay tuned. Bye for now, everybody.